and welcome to this week's Used Car Heaven. We've got all our regular features coming up soon, including the trading post and our car doctor back in the surgery. And this week's viewer, Gareth Rogers, is looking to trade in his Renault Megane convertible for a compact executive car. And we've got three great candidates for him to choose from. Hi Gareth.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice place to meet you.
Right, currently at the moment you're driving what, a Renault Megane Cabriolet?
Yeah, that's my current vehicle at the moment.
You've been happy with that?
I've been happy with the car, yeah, but it's turned out to be somewhat impractical now.
Despite being nice on a day like this?
Well, that's the only practicality really with it, that's for weather. But as you know, we don't really get the weather in this country.
We certainly
anyway.
don't. I mean, what's the main reason why you want to change after that at the moment?
My girlfriend's 2-year-old daughter. We can't get a car seat to actually fit the car. And obviously with the limited boot space, we're struggling with everyday things such as shopping.
So that's a problem. So you're looking to trade up to something a bit more prestigious maybe?
Yeah, more along the executive model. Without actually going as far as the full family saloon.
Okay, you don't want something too large.
No, not at all.
Well, we've picked out three, we think, ideal examples for you here. First of all, an Audi A3. Now, this is a 5-door model. It's got a decent boot on it as well. What's your initial impressions of this car?
I'm quite a fan of the Audi, actually. I do actually like the shape of them. They're a nice looking car, and they look exceptionally well built, which you'd expect from the Germans.
Superbly built. Superbly built. So, Audi A3. What about the BMW? This is a 318 IS Coupe, so it's maybe not quite as ideal on the practicality side of things. Do you like the look of them? Oh yes, yeah, I do like the look of it, especially with it being the coupe as well, with it only having the 2 doors. I'm sure if I like this vehicle that I could succumb to its charms. Yeah. It's a problem getting in and out of the back with the kids though, isn't it? That could be a potential problem. It could be a potential problem. I'd have to try that to see. And finally, let's move down the line to the Rover 75, launched in a blaze of publicity 2 or 3 years ago. What do you think of this? It's very Jaguar looking. It's got that sort of retro image to it, hasn't it? It's got the retro image, but I wouldn't say they've actually pulled it off 100%. Not quite hit the mark. I've seen better. I say it's the sort of vehicle that I'd expect to see myself in another 15 years and not at the moment. Now, when is a Golf not a Golf? When it's an Audi A3, because this car is essentially the same as the VW Golf. It shares all the same components as that car, but it wears the more prestigious Audi badge, and that is a big selling point for Audi. They've sold stacks and stacks of these cars since it was launched in 1996. Now, the 5-door models came along in 1999, so this is probably one of the early 5-door cars. This is a standard 1.6. You could have a bit more power and go for the 1.8 or the 1.8 turbo. Now, as standard, all Audis are front-wheel drive cars unless you go for the Quattro option, which might well be worth it. If you want a diesel, well, in my opinion, there's no better than Audi's diesel engines. The 1.9 turbo diesel will give you somewhere near 50 miles to the gallon. I think the A3 is one of the classiest small cars on the market today. So Gareth, the Audi A3, it's a 1.65 door. What are your initial impressions about the way that it drives and it handles, and do you like it?
I do like it actually, Ian. It handles very well on the road. It feels very sturdy. Its responsiveness, it's not too bad considering it's only a 1.6 engine.
Yeah, it's only got 100 brake horsepower, so it's not going to set the world on fire, but I mean, you could go, if you wanted a bit more power, go for the 1.8 or the 1.8 turbos as well. What about the size of the car? Is this big enough for you, do you think? It's got 5 doors, it's got a reasonable boot on it?
Yeah, I would say it is big enough actually. It doesn't, from the outside, it doesn't actually look as big as what it actually feels inside, which is a nice surprise. There is plenty of room in here.
I mean, perhaps downsides to this car, it's not got air conditioning or climate control on it, but you could always find a car like this that has got a few extra goodies on. And the great thing with the A3 is that they do start cheap now. I mean, some of them are as low as £6,500, and this one is well within your budget. You've set yourself about £12,000, and this would cost somewhere around about 11 or 11.5, so it's within your budget.
That's nice to know. It is. I think it is a lot of money. It's a lot of car for not a lot of money.
So Gareth, you've had a drive of the Audi A3, 1.6. What's your verdict on this car?
I quite like this car actually, Ian. It's very nice to drive, very sturdy, very solid on the road. Feels very well put together, everything you'd expect from an Audi.
Main dislikes of the car?
The only dislikes I really had was obviously the 1.6 engine is a little underpowered for the size of the car, and the little niggles that I had with the gearbox.
Which we think is just a simple problem with this particular car. It's not standard across the A3 range generally.
Yeah, I would hope so.
So, it's generally a thumbs up for the A3, but first here's Peter at the trading post.
Right, you found the car you want. Let's make sure you're not spending your money on a lemon. First thing to look for would be the bodywork. What I generally do is get down on my knees, look right down the sides, make sure all the panels are straight, make sure there's no dents in there. Run your hand along the paintwork. If you find any grit under the paintwork, then that'll tell you that that panel's been painted. So that's one thing to check for. Next would be to check all the door alignments and door jambs. Make sure that the gaps are not too big. Make sure they looked correct on both sides. Make sure the doors open and shut properly. Make sure there's no wear in the hinges. That'll tell you that the car's done a few miles if it has got wear in there. If the car's parked up against the wall or a fence, make sure you get it out in a good daylight. Make sure you have a good look right round the car, because you never know, if it's parked up against a hedge or something, it might be hiding something. And then tyres. Check the tyres. If they're wearing unevenly, as in wearing on the outside or on the inside, then that could mean that there's a steering problem with it. I mean, it could be something as simple as the tracking, but if they're just worn in general, then make sure that might even be able to use that as a lever. Chip them a little bit on the price, but make sure they're replaced. They're not expensive, but don't let it put you off the car. Now, that's it for this week. Next week we'll be looking at the interior of the car and what to look out for in there.
The Rover 75 was the last throw of the dice for BMW's interest in the British Rover car company. They'd invested millions and millions of pounds in developing this car to replace the ageing 600 and 800 series. So this car was desperately needed by Rover showrooms to create more interest. It was designed to be the best front-wheel drive car in the world, to take on the likes of BMW's 3 Series, Audi's A4 and the Alfa 156. In reality though, it never quite succeeded. And now that this car's been on the market for 3 years, and with price cuts across the board, these are getting seriously cheap cars, but depreciation is a problem. Now, Gareth, you've already expressed reservations about the Rover 75 before you've even driven it. Now you've got a chance to sit in it and have a drive of it. What are your first thoughts on this car?
My first thoughts are I don't particularly like this car. I wouldn't expect this car to even compete with the likes of Jaguar or BMW for that matter.
I mean, it's funny you say that, because that's exactly what this car was designed to do. As I've already mentioned before, it was designed to compete with BMW and Audi and Mercedes-Benz, but it falls way short, doesn't it?
It does definitely fall way short. I couldn't see a family riding around in this car at all.
So Gareth, the second of our three cars is the Rover 75, 2-litre V6 Classic. What's your honest opinion on this car?
Well, I can safely say, Ian, that my opinion of this car hasn't changed since I first clapped eyes on it earlier on.
I mean, you weren't keen on it when you were driving it, were you?
No, not at all. The steering's very vague. You don't really get proper feedback from the road. It's probably the closest to driving a bus, I'd imagine.
Do you think you're just too young for this sort of car?
Yeah, definitely too young. I think another 20 years and I may settle down to driving something like this, but in the meantime I could not see myself behind the wheel of this car.
And depreciation is a big problem on a car like this, which is worrying.
Yeah, it's definitely worrying if you're going to spend the best part of £12,000 on a car. You want it to be worth something at least when you finish using it.
So the Audi A3, definitely preferable over this?
Yeah, definitely preferable
All right,
over this.
chance for you to drive the 3 Series Coupe coming up soon. Also, the Car Doctor to come in part 2. That's all on the way. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Used Car Heaven. Still to come, we've more from the Car Doctor in his surgery, and also Gareth will get to drive the BMW 3 Series Coupe. But first, here's Richard Hammond with an alternative suggestion for Gareth.
My alternative for you is very much an alternative choice. It looks unlike anything else on the road, and it is unlike anything else on the road. But despite all of that, the Mercedes A-Class is still very much a Mercedes, which should give you all the badge credibility your heart desires. But the A-Class is definitely not your run-of-the-mill Merc. It is an amazingly clever piece of packaging. For a start, it looks very small on the outside. Well, it is very small on the outside. The really clever stuff is in here. Or if we're going to be really precise about it, the clever stuff is underneath us, because the reason you sit so high up in the A-Class is the designers used a clever double floor construction. It raises us up above all the gubbins that runs the car that we don't want to worry about. And the result is they could release a huge amount of interior space. And I do mean a lot, because there's as much interior space in here, in this small car, as you'd find in a standard Mercedes saloon. And that is a lot. Now the A-Class, it has to be said, has been around a few years now, so you're not going to stand out from the crowd that much. It's perhaps not quite the radical choice it would have been when it first came out. But the good news there is it means there's loads of them around, and of course it is a Mercedes, so they should be in pretty good nick. The build quality is impeccable. This specific one is a long wheelbase version, and as they've only just come out, you may be stretching it a bit on your budget. But for your kind of money, you could easily pick up an A160 in this avant-garde trim, a year 2000 model on a Y-plate. And that means you could look forward to years of practical motoring in still a very small car that gives you membership of that exclusive club of the Mercedes drivers.
BMWs are very aspirational cars, and I can well see why Gareth likes the look of this 318 Coupe. Now, these cars have been around for quite some time. This is the old shape 3 Series Coupe, and these were first launched back in 1992. Now, this 4-year-old example has only done 37,000 miles. It's got a full BMW service history, which I think is essential if you're going to buy this sort of car. You could find one way cheaper, but it's probably done a higher mileage or not had that particular service history, which is vital. Now, BMWs are very good cars to drive. Most manufacturers would give their right arm to produce a car as good as this. And I think Gareth will find that it is good on the road. Now, Gareth, in our initial chat, when we were just sort of introducing the cars, I could see you were already beginning to drool over this car a little bit. What do you think of it now you've got a chance to drive it?
Well, like you say, you're quite right there. I was quite looking forward to driving the car. It is, as I expected, it's quite pokey. It's got a lovely engine note to it. You can feel the power. It's the one thing that I'd say you can definitely notice is the ride on the car. It's quite stiff, what you'd expect from obviously a sports coupe. Maybe a little bit too stiff for obviously having a child in the back of the car.
But how do you sort of compare this against the A3?
So this is a nicer drive, but it is more of a sports car. I mean, if I was free and single, then out of the three, I would be very happy to go out and purchase something like this.
So Gareth, the BMW 318 IS Coupe, it's a nice looking car, isn't it? What's your opinion on this?
This was definitely the best to drive out of the three. There was plenty of power there. It was very responsive, very nice on the road. Very nice handling actually. A lot of response from the steering.
What about downsides to this? I mean, I suppose the main thing is the fact that it's a two-door coupe, and as a family car, it's not perfect, is it? Far from it.
Yeah, that is probably the only downside to the car. Obviously, I would struggle trying to get child seat and a child in and out of the car with it only being two-door. But for that matter, I would consider looking at a four-door model of this car.
So, your final verdict coming up soon on these three cars, but first let's go off to the surgery, and here's the car doctor.
Well, have you ever heard of an Astra G? Because that's what this model is, and in fact you probably haven't heard of it, but us people in the trade, we have code names for them, or Vauxhall do. This model's an Astra G, the model before it was an Astra F, the Mark II as you know it was an Astra E, etc. So if you're ordering any parts or anything like that, it's handy to know that. But Astra Gs have got a problem on the headlamps at the moment, so much so that you'll find that from time to time the headlights will steam up and get condensation in them. Now, that's not a problem at the moment if your car's under warranty, because as part of the warranty job at the moment, Vauxhall will quite happily fit you a new set of headlights, but that's not the only problem. The problem is, because it's so aerodynamic, and it does look quite good and almost BMW-like, it comes at a price. And that price is that we've got very, very close tolerances around the front end between the bonnet and wing and headlight. So much so that we've actually got to use some feeler gauges to measure the gap between the bonnet and the headlight to make sure it's set up correctly. If it isn't, then because of the aerodynamics, we get water going over the top of the headlight, underneath the bonnet and into it. Now, you might think, well, I've only got my car under warranty, so that's not a problem. But once the car's out of warranty, you don't want to be spending money every few months changing these. So I'm going to show you how you can rectify the problem if you've got this car and it's out of warranty. So we'll lift the bonnet up and we'll see how to adjust it on the stops. Now we can see what's happening underneath there, and you can see the two adjusters. It's very critical that we adjust both sides accurately, and it's trial and error. And you can see there's one adjuster there. We screw it out to lift the bonnet up, screw it in to move the bonnet down, and there's exactly the same thing over on this side here. And with the bonnet up, we can see the actual seal on top of the headlight, and it's designed so the bonnet squashes down on there, make it nice and tight, because as it is, water can get up and inside the headlight, and you can actually see we've got condensation on this headlight here already, so this is going to need changing. Now, because it's made to such fine tolerances, it's pretty critical, but you can see that it is avoidable by having it adjusted correctly. So if your car is out of warranty, you could maybe adjust it yourself and have a play, and hopefully save yourself some astronomical bills at the garage.
So Gareth, you set us the task of finding you three cars that first of all fit within your budget of £12,000, and secondly that are a bit more desirable than your current Renault Megane. Do you think we've succeeded in the three that we've provided for you? First of all, the Rover 75. A good point about this, if there is one for you.
The good point about this is that I will not be buying it.
And the bad point about it?
I would safe to say everything is the bad point about this car.
You really hated that car with a vengeance,
I really
didn't
did
you?
hate that car.
Okay, what about the BMW 318 Coupe? Good point about this car.
Good point about this car is the image, the handling, the performance. It's a lovely car, lovely looking car.
But on the downside?
On the downside, it's not practical. The suspension's a little bit stiff for having a child obviously in the back of the car. And I say the styling is a little bit dated now.
It's a shame about that one.
Yeah.
Which leads us on to the final one, the Audi A3. You like this car?
I do like this car, yeah.
I mean, what specifically did you really like about it?
I like the styling, I like the shape. It's well put together, well made. And
Bad points?
Bad points. The only bad points really is it's slightly underpowered from what I'm actually looking for.
And this is actually the cheapest of the three cars that we've provided for you. I mean, you could pick that particular model up for somewhere around £10,500, but a better spec car would still be easily within your £12,000 budget.
Yeah, you're completely right.
You'd look
there,
for something like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks a lot, Gareth. That's it for this week's Used Car Heaven. Join us again at the same time next week.